welcome back to my channel. I'm very excited to bring you a reading wrap up for the end of the month. We are going to put together March and April reads because I didn't get to film March monthly wrap-up video as I was away at the start of April in Kuala Lumpur. I read a total of 14 books over these 2 months, which is pretty incredible. I actually think I read 8 in March and 6 in April, but April I did read a few big ones. In terms of a breakdown, on my March TBR list, I read 4 of the 6 books in there, so that's pretty good. The 2 that I didn't get to is Belladonna and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, but that's okay, we'll get to them, I'm sure. I have 4 mystery books that I read, and these are the first mystery books I've ever read. I'm not really a mystery thriller girly. I get scared very easily, but I thought I'd jump into this genre over the last couple of months and give it a go, and I found some I really like. We also have 4 romance books. I love a good romance. 3 fantasy, 2 historical fictions actually, and my very first young adult sci-fi book as well. I've never read sci-fi. So there's a few new genres in the list for me that I'm very excited for. I thought we could do it in order of the books that I read them. There are 3 5-star reads. So the first book that I read during March is Daisy Hates The Great Undoing. So this is the second Daisy Hates book in the Magnolia Parks universe. This is the newer cover. I have the OG ones here, which are more beautiful, but this was a 5-star read for me. I think if you watched my very first TBR chooses my February reads, I ended up reading Daisy Hates in there, and I was not looking forward to it. I didn't like the first Magnolia Parks universe. I just thought that I wasn't gonna love the universe at all, but I am obsessed. I can't tell you too much about these first 2 books just because it is book number 3 and number 5 in the series, I believe. But essentially the series as a whole, book 1, 3 and 5, you follow Magnolia Parks and BJ, and then book 2 and 4, and then there will be a 6 eventually, you follow Daisy Hates and Christian Hems. I think that I'm a Daisy Hates girl. Let me know in the comments what you think. It is like a London high society, think Gossip Girl vibes kind of situation. This was a 5 stars for me, easy. I loved it so much. And then I went into Magnolia Parks Into the Dark. So this is the final installment of Magnolia Parks, which is so sad. I encourage you, if you read the first Magnolia Parks and you didn't like it, I suggest pushing through and seeing if you like Daisy Hates and the second Magnolia Parks, because it gets so much better. This is like the final book. This was like a 5-star read. This is a 6-star read for me, honestly. It wraps it up so nicely. I cried. Like, this book is, like, if you know, you know. That's all I can say, because I can't give away what this book's about because it'll give away the first 2 Magnolia Parks books. I was not convinced from reading the first Magnolia Parks that I would like BJ in particular, but the character growth you see throughout the series, the way these characters are flawed, very toxic. I will put that out there. Just know if you're going into this, it is a romance book, but it is quite a toxic romance book. So just know that. But this one redeemed everything for me. It was beautiful. The way it touches on... Actually, I'm not even going to say it because I don't want to give away anything. My camera decided to stop filming. So hopefully we'll have no more issues. The next book that I read in the month of March is Girl, Woman and Other by Bernardine Evaristo. This is what this one looks like. This is a historical fiction. At least that's what I'd classify it as, but it could also be a general fiction, to be honest. And you follow the stories of 12 African women that live in England throughout different generations. The concept of this book is really interesting because you do follow along with the different struggles that they face, and also how you can see the progression from generation to generation. However, I did only give this 2.5 stars. My main quirk with the book that I didn't love is it does feel like it's narrated at you. You're not really in the character's world. You don't get emotionally attached to a character. I have read another book that has multiple POVs called Star-Crossed, and I think what I'm finding the more I read is I enjoy multiple POVs, but my limit's probably 3 or 4. Like, I can't get attached to multiple characters at one time. So as much as I did love the content of this book and the concept, it was just too many characters for me. I would have preferred just maybe 3 or 4 different women and you follow along their story and you get introduced to some of the other characters throughout their lives, if that makes sense. because yeah, 12 characters was just a little bit too much for me. I hope that makes sense. I do still recommend it because the concept and the content it follows is really good. It's just the writing style wasn't for me personally. So that is the third book that I read in the month of March. And then I was like, you know what, I am 28 years old. Perhaps I should give thriller / mystery a try and just see if it's for me. Do I like scary movies? No, but I thought, why not just give it a go? So I decided I'd start with The Naturals. This is a YA thriller. So I want to just preference this, that this is really young adult. So if you are like a very thriller, mystery heavy reader, I'm not sure if this book would be for you because it is young adult. You follow a bunch of teenagers that are gifted in some sort of way, and they get brought in by the FBI to work on cold cases, essentially, using the skills that they have. It's like a little program that they run in the FBI with these teenagers. So the main character in this book is a profiler. You follow a serial killer. There's a little bit of like teenage angst. There's a little love interest. Despite it being young adult and feeling young adult, I didn't actually guess the twist in this book, and I will be continuing this series. So this is by the author Jennifer Lynn Barnes. It's the same author as Inheritance Games, which I haven't actually read yet, but I've heard amazing things about that series too. I do really recommend this. I actually gave it 4.5 stars. I do have the next book to read on my next month TBR, my May one. But I'm very excited to see where it goes next. And it was a very, very, very easy book to flip through. It was a nice book to like break up historical fictions, or even like if you're in a fantasy mood and you want something to break it up that you're going to fly through. I do recommend the Natural series. So that was the next book that I read. It speeded along a little bit. Book number 5 was Heartless. So this is the second book in the Chestnut Springs series. In the second book, you follow the bigger brother of the first book. So you follow Cade Eaton, and his love interest is the best friend of his brother's partner. There's an age gap in here. There's Grumpy Sunshine. He's a single dad. He hires a nanny in, and the rest is history. I'm going to keep it very short, but I really liked it. I think I preferred it to the first book, but I still would give it 4 stars. I'm loving this series, and I do want to keep going on it. Book number 6 is our second historical fiction in this little monthly, bi-monthly I should say, wrap up, and it is Lady Tan's Circle of Womans by Lisa C. I picked this up at my local bookshop. I loved this book. I was getting a little bit concerned that maybe historical fiction's not for me because I've read a few that I just haven't loved, but I think I just needed the right one. So this one is following your main character Tan, who is born into an elite family. It is set in the Ming Dynasty, so in China, Ming Dynasty in, I believe it's the 15th century. In this kind of world, women are essentially brought up to be a good daughter, and then a good wife, a good mother, and a good daughter-in-law, essentially. That is your value as a woman. You also, your one job is to give birth to a son. That is the kind of world that this is set on. So our main character Tan does learn medicine through her grandmother, and at the age of, I think it's 15, they get married off. So your main character gets married off to this family, and then you essentially just follow along with the struggles that brings upon her. So she can no longer practice medicine. She's trying to find her own identity in this world. Her and her mother-in-law have quite a rough relationship. She struggles to give birth to a son. You just follow along with her struggles. At the same time, you're introduced to her best friend Mei Ling that she's had since being a child. And Mei Ling is from a lower class, well, I would say lower class to middle class society, so different upbringing, and she studies under her mother. It's a beautiful story of friendship, a beautiful story of womanhood, and I do really, really recommend this book. I haven't heard many people talk about it, but I loved it, and I actually gave it 4.5 stars as well. So I was having a great month of reading in March because, yeah, I loved this so much. And then I'll put the next 2 books together, but I read one in March and one in April, both on my Kindle. Both are on Kindle Unlimited. So I read The Housemaid and The Housemaid's Secret, both by Frida McFadden. They're a little duology. I'm not sure. There might be a 3rd book coming out, I think. I think I saw on Amazon. So there might be a 3rd book. But it is another thriller, and I loved it. I gave them both 4 stars. There's twists and turns. You're trying to guess who the suspect is, because there's so many illusions that it could be character A, B, C, or D, and you're just trying to work out who it is. You never quite guess it, but there's depth to it. I love the female main character. I actually don't want to give too much of the story away, so I just recommend picking it up and giving it a read. It was another book that was really easy to read after like a historical fiction and just something to fly through. And then in between that, I read The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. So this is The Hunger Games meets vampires, essentially. And I gobbled this up. This was my pick for book club. I gave the first book 4 stars, and then I actually did read The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, so the second book in this, and I'd give that 4.5 stars. I actually preferred the second book, which is surprising, and I read that one on my Kindle because I haven't actually got the physical book just yet. But essentially you are following a adopted human daughter of a vampire king, and to kind of prove her strengths, she gets put into this Hunger Games style games where she's against all these vampires. If you win, you get to ask the god for whatever you want. And I'm not going to tell you what she wants, but that is the little thing. You have a love interest, kind of like an enemies to lover, forced proximity, different identities. There's definitely power struggles in here. She is a boss of a female as well. I loved it. I will say it did let me down a tiny bit. Like I expected more from it, maybe because I've heard such amazing things. The premise of like Hunger Games meets vampires sounds very cool. But I will say the second book, The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, kind of filled in all the gaps that I wanted in this book. So yeah, this was more of a story of almost like a coming of age, finding herself. And then the second book is more like political, high fantasy. You get more into like the darker side of the vampire world. But I loved them both and I do recommend it. So I read this one in March and I read the second book in April. And then after the second book in The Crowns of Nyaxia, I read Part of Your World. I thought, you know what, I've read a few fantasies, I've read a couple of thrillers. Let's put a little romance in here. And let's begin my Abby Jimenez journey. Because I did decide to buy the new one just for summer. So I thought I need to start this series. I loved this book. I also gave this 4.5 stars and I absolutely loved it. It is an adult romance story, which I love. I think I definitely prefer adult over young adult romance stories. Both characters have different struggles and you get emotional depth in there. There's a slight age gap, but the woman is actually older than the man. The woman is a doctor from a high elite society and her love interest is from a small town. He is a carpenter, but he also runs an Airbnb. There's found family. The town that the male main character's from is just beautiful. The like little camaraderie of the small town. You also get, again, kind of like Lady Tan, Circle of Woman. Despite the characters being from different classes, you can see the different kind of struggles that they both have. So the one from the upper class, a medical family, has a lot of family pressure to perform at a certain level. There's all these expectations on her that she dates a certain guy and keeps up a certain status. They follow along with her ex a little bit as well, who was very emotionally abusive. He was a gaslighter, but the family is obsessed with him because he does fit that style. He was a head surgeon, so he kind of fits the mold that they want to put her in. And then on the complete opposite side, you have the main guy who's called Daniel, and he is from more of a working class family. He's the town mayor, but he also has this pressure that's more inwardly put on him. His pressure is a lot to do with financial stress and like the pressures he's got from his mum who's not really in his life. So both characters have the different things that they're struggling together, and there is a little bit of lack of communication. So if that is something that bothers you, like, just know there is a bit of lack of communication. It's a tiny bit insta-lovey, but also they initially go into it as a friends with benefit thing, not a relationship. So if you can look past that, then I think you'll really love it, because it was such a beautiful story and I love a romance story that is emotionally deep, and this was definitely that for sure. Then in April I read a couple of other books on my Kindle. So the first one I read was the Mind F series. I just read the first little book called The Risk. I've talked about this series in a couple of videos, so I'll keep it very brief, but it's 5 little books and you're following an FBI agent who is working on a serial killer case, At the same time, he starts dating a woman, and it turns out that the woman is the serial killer. I know. I am in my thriller era, as you can see. And then the next book that I read on my Kindle was my book club book for the month of April, and that was Cinder. So that was my first sci-fi book. It is very YA as well. It's by Marissa Meyer. It is essentially inspired by Cinderella. Cinder is a cyborg, which is like a half human, half robot kind of thing. She had a tragedy when she was young, and then to keep her alive they had to make her half cyborg. In this society, like being a cyborg is looked down at lower class, and then there is this illness that's brought into the city, kind of like smallpox but in a sci-fi situation, and she's brought in to be like a trial to try to find a cure for it. And there's obviously Prince Charming in there as well. I gave it 3 stars just because it is really YA, but I do think that I want to continue the series. Although it is sci-fi, like I've never read sci-fi and I didn't really find it that sci-fi, so I feel a little bit funny saying that it's sci-fi just because she was a cyborg. It kind of felt a little bit like that, like let's make her a cyborg to say this is sci-fi. But I still did enjoy it, and I do want to continue the series. But let me know in the comments if you have read this series and if you think I should read it. This author also wrote The Renegades, so let me know if I should start that series, because apparently that is also, I think, a sci-fi FBI kind of style series, and I've heard great things about that. And then the final book I read was my book club book for the month of April, my other book club, and that is House of Earth and Blood, the first Crescent City book. I was terrified to start this because I haven't read Throne of Glass. I've read all of Agatha, and then I went straight to Crescent City, and I have heard that this is epic fantasy, so it goes kind of like Agatha, Throne of Glass, Crescent City. So I was a bit nervous jumping from like level 1 fantasy to level 3 fantasy. But surprisingly, I found it pretty good. The first like 5 or so chapters are definitely like dump of just information, and you don't really know what's going on at all. But instead of trying to decipher what every character is and what all these different types of beings are, you just need to focus on the main story. I did listen to probably maybe half or 2/3 of this on Audible, and that really did help me. But I found the actual general story easy enough to follow, and I was very emotionally connected to both the characters in here. Without going too much into detail, you follow a half fae, half human main character named Bryce. At the beginning of the book there is a murder, and then it fast forwards to 2 years later, and these murders start happening again, and they can't work out why. And then there's this big political event that is going to be held in the city in, I think it's like a couple of months' time. So the equivalent of the FBI bring in Bryce to try to help solve these murders, and then they keep happening, and then there's obviously a lot more that goes into why they're happening. There's politics in there, there's a lot of depth. There's a love interest, which is beautiful, a slow burn love interest, which I actually quite enjoyed in this book. But I really recommend it, and I want to read the next book whilst it's fresh in my mind. So I gave this 5 stars actually. So this and the 2 Magnolia Park books are my 5-star reads. But that is my little wrap up. I know that this video was probably a bit long, but I did put the 2 months together. I hope you really enjoyed it. Definitely let me know what you think I should read next. If you have a beginner sci-fi or like a beginner low stake mystery book that you could suggest for me, I'd love to know. I'm trying to branch out a bit more, but I'm just a bit nervous of those 2 genres. But as always, please don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Definitely follow me over on my Instagram, on my Goodreads. They're just Brooke McQuaid, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!